Okay, today we are going to be looking at how to set up a VPN connection to our TrueNas server so that we can access our shared files or our NAS or even other machines on our local network remotely and securely. So let's take a look at how to do that. So if we take a look at the current TrueNas SMP share, we can see we have our dump share here. And this is just storing some files, and we'll need to be able to access these files remotely. The end user in this case is working from their house, and they would like to be able to access the files on their TrueNas server from home. And they'd like to do that in a secure fashion that makes it easy for them to connect and access those files. So let's take a look at the machine that they have. Okay, so this is the end user's machine. And we can see here, so they're not able to access this, and the IP is something completely different. Okay, so let's head over to our TrueNas system and log in and take a look at what we can do to allow them access. Okay, so here's our TrueNas system that we'd like to be able to access remotely. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to be able to set up a secure way to authenticate the TrueNas server and OpenVPN to the TrueNas server, as well as any remote connections. We want to be able to provide a way to say that it is a legitimate connection and this server is the legitimate server that you're connecting to. And the way that we do that is through certificates. So unless you want to pay for a certificate, which in most cases you probably don't if you're running TrueNas, we can create our own certificate authority, which will be our TrueNas server. And this is just to authenticate the certificates that we'll be using to say that it is a genuine certificate and the connection is allowed. Okay, so we'll come here, we'll select add, and we will create our certificate. So we can select profile, and it's going to be an OpenVPN root certificate authority. So let's name it appropriately. OpenVPN root CA. And then we will fill out our information here appropriately. This isn't really that big of a deal. You can put whatever you want. I'm just going to put my local information. Okay, so for common name, you'll want to have a dynamic DNS or at least a URL or a domain that points to the address that this machine is located at. So it could be your internet-facing IP, as long as this domain name resolves to that address. So for us, we have a dynamic IP set up. So for common name, it'll only accept one argument. If you have multiple domains pointing to this IP address, you can put them in the SAN or the subject alternative names. You also want to have your primary common name in here as well. So let's add that. Okay, and you'll see here that once we hit enter, it puts its own entry and allows you to add an additional entry, whereas this one does not, because this one only accepts a single entry. And then that's all we need for the root certificate. We can leave most of this stuff default if you want to increase this, but SHA-256 is fairly good, and a key of 2048 bits is also pretty standard and pretty good. So we'll hit submit, and there's our self-signed OpenVPN root certificate authority certificate. Lots of certificates here. So the next certificate that we want to create, we will select the certificates down here, and TrueNas comes by default with its own IX Systems certificate. And we don't want to use this one. We'll create a new one. Okay, so this one is going to be the certificate for the OpenVPN server. This one's going to be a certificate that is signed by the certificate authority that we just created. Okay, so the name, we'll call this OpenVPN server. And the profile, we have two options here, OpenVPN server certificate and the client. Right now, we're going to create a server certificate. and the option up here, you'll see that we have an OpenVPN root CA. This is the one that we just created in the certificate authorities section. We will be using that one. This we can leave default, and we'll fill in our information again here. And the remaining stuff we can leave as default, and we click on submit. Perfect. Now we have a certificate authority and a certificate for our OpenVPN server to provide our connection. So now that that's complete, we can go over to our services, and here we see one of the services is OpenVPN server, and we can configure that here. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is we want to use the OpenVPN server certificate that we have just created, and the root certificate authority is going to be this TrueNas server. So select the certificate authority certificate that we have created earlier. And then for server, this is going to be the network subnet that our clients will be joining when they connect to this VPN. So we don't want it to be the same as the network that we're on, which is 192.168.0.23, because this is going to assign addresses from the bottom up. So if we assign it 192.168.0.0/24, the first client that joins is going to get .2 as an address, and that address is likely already assigned on this network. So we don't want to interfere with that. So we will change the network to 1.0/24. So our clients will join this subnet instead. I like to change the port here just so it's not the standard default. And I think we already have another VPN service on another machine for something else separate. So the authentication algorithm and the cipher, this is all going to be, there's a lot of selection here. I'm just going to go and select the most common stuff. SHA-256 is a fairly common, well understood algorithm. It is fairly secure. And the cipher that I like to select is going to be AES-256-CBC. Okay, and then we don't need any compression. It's not necessary. And I like to select this to TCP. We're going to create a tunnel, and the topology is going to be subnet. We'll do TLS crypt auth enabled. Okay, so let's save this. And then we should be able to start our OpenVPN server. And we want this also to start automatically. So select start automatically with the checkbox. Okay, so now at this point, we should be able to connect to our OpenVPN server, but there are a few more things that we need to do. We need to be able to securely connect to the OpenVPN server. So if we go here, we select download client config, you'll see that there's only the OpenVPN server. We don't want to use this certificate to connect to the OpenVPN server. So let's create another certificate that is going to allow us to connect using our OpenVPN client. So we'll come here, we'll say add. This time under profile, we're going to select OpenVPN client certificate, and we'll name this one OpenVPN user 1. The certificate authority is again going to be this TrueNas server, and we'll fill in this information. Okay, now we've created a user 01. So if you want to have multiple people connecting or multiple remote clients connecting to this, you can create multiple users to separate them and have control over who is and isn't able to connect by adding and removing these. So if it's the same person or the same end user connecting and they have multiple machines, maybe a couple laptops or something, you can provide them with the same certificate on multiple machines, and it will allow connections from those multiple machines. You don't need it per machine, you just need it per user. And that user can use the same certificate on multiple machines if they need. Unless you want to have control over those specific machines, and you can send them out multiple certificates for each machine. And if one machine gets compromised, you don't have to reissue a new certificate for all of those remote machines, just the one that's been compromised. It's up to you on how you want to handle that. So now we have a certificate. So let's go over to our services and back to our OpenVPN server. We will select configure. And now when we go to download client config, we have the option here for user 01. Select that and hit submit. And that will download a OpenVPN client config.ovpn file. We will save that. And this file we're going to take to our remote machine, and it will allow us to configure our OpenVPN client to connect back to the TrueNAS over the VPN service that we've just created. Okay, and before we are able to connect to our TrueNAS server remotely, because we're on a local subnet and we are not internet facing directly, we'll want to forward the port that we're using from our router out on the public internet into our subnet to this port. So we will have to go over to our router to configure that. So most routers nowadays do support port forwarding, and this should be an option in your router. All routers are different. So let's take a look at the router that's on this network. Okay, so I've just gone over to the port forwarding section of this router. We're going to create our port forwarding. So we'll do both TCP and UDP, and the port range we're going to select is 1196. So that's on the public side. So the client is going to be reaching out to this IP address on port 1196, and we want to forward that to the port 1196. So basically pass through, and we want it to go to the TrueNAS server that we are configuring, which is 23, and apply. And we can see that down here at the bottom. And that should be it for the configuration on the router. Okay, so here's our file. Let's send it over to the remote machine, and we will look at how to configure OpenVPN on the remote machine. Okay, so here we are on our remote machine, and we've downloaded our OVPN file. So let's download the OpenVPN client that we will be using to make this connection for us. So we just Google OpenVPN, or we can go to openvpn.net. And right on the front page for openvpn.net, it should detect that we're on Windows and provide a download button. Let's download that. And we will install it. Okay, so I would always make sure that you download the latest version. If you already have this installed and your TrueNAS version is newer, make sure you re-download and install the latest version, because TrueNAS does update their server version and it may cause incompatibility issues, which I have seen previously. So get the latest version and install it. And it gives us this icon down here, and it indicates to us that we're disconnected. So we don't need the onboarding tour. And click agree. Some updates. Okay, and before we double click on this file and import it, we do have to make a change to it. So we can right click on it and select edit with Notepad++. And we'll see here that the remote connection, it is set to the IP address of our TrueNAS server. And we want to set this to our DNS URL that we've configured our certificates with. Okay, and that's the only change that we have to make here. So we will save that file. And then we can go ahead and we can double click on this. And the profile is for Techworks. So we'll select the option to connect after import, and we'll say add. And that's it, we're connected. So this isn't the end of it. Just because we're connected to the TrueNAS system doesn't mean we actually get the services for it. So let's take a look here. We are connected to the TrueNAS server over the VPN, but do we have the ability to connect to its IP? And it doesn't seem so. And we don't. We are able to connect to it over VPN, but that didn't do anything for us. So there's a couple things we can do here to remedy this. So let's head back over to our TrueNAS server. And there are two ways that we can configure our TrueNAS server to either provide VPN service for that subnet so that we have access to that subnet local network and all of the services it might provide, like other servers or other shares or web services within that local subnet, or we can configure it just to have access to the TrueNAS server itself and the share that's on there. So let's take a look. Okay, and we can see here that the IP address that we received was 168.1.2, which is the IP subnet that we provided. Okay, so for the most part, when you're setting up a VPN, I would generally assume that you would want to be able to access the network that the VPN server is on. So in order to do that, we have to configure our OpenVPN server a little bit further with some additional parameters. So the first additional parameter that we're going to need is to push route. So the route that we want to push is our local network. We want to push this route out to the server IP address, basically. So we'll provide the subnet that the TrueNAS server is sitting on locally, which is 192.168.0.0, and then the subnet mask. Then we're also going to want to push, and we're going to redirect the gateway and bypass DHCP. So redirect. Okay, and then we also want to push to this network our DNS options. So we can use Google or we can use Cloudflare, whatever we want. So I will put in the Google IP, which is going to be 8.8.8. So we want to push DHCP option DNS 8.8.8.8. And then if you want a secondary one, we will do push DHCP option DNS, and we'll use a Cloudflare one as our secondary. Okay, so these are all the options that we want to have in the additional parameters. Select save. Okay, the next thing that we want to do is we want to go over to our static routes. And here we're going to want to add a static route. Basically, we want traffic destined to our client's network, which is 192.168.1 network. We want to use the TrueNAS system as its gateway. Okay, so the destination is going to be our client network. And the gateway is going to be this TrueNAS server. Okay. And we'll just label the description on there so we know what it is and submit. Okay, and then we have one last set of configuration to perform, which is going to be in the tunables section of a system. So what we'll be doing in here is enabling NAT-D on the back end of the TrueNAS system to allow NAT to pass and forward traffic to our client's subnet. Okay, so there's 5 or 6 options that we need to put here. So the first one we will provide is firewall enable. The value is going to be yes. And the type is going to be rc.conf. Add that one. The next one is going to be the firewall type. So firewall type. This is going to be open. It's going to be rc.conf. All of these will be type rc.conf. So gateway enable. So this option is going to allow traffic forwarding, and this is going to be yes. And then we want to enable the NAT-D services. Okay, so the NAT-D interface, and our interface that we have connected on here is LE0. And the last one we have here is going to be NAT-D flags. And the option is going to be -dynamic -M, and this is going to have a dynamic NAT that preserves port numbers. Submit. So you should have a tunables that looks similar to this. So the last thing to do is reboot your TrueNAS server. Because these are applied on boot up and they are attached to the rc.conf file, we need to restart the system. So go ahead and do that. And we'll head over to the remote client machine once this is rebooted, and we'll connect. Okay, so here we are back at the client machine. We have our OpenVPN client here. Let's click on connect. We should be able to connect again. Okay, and there we are connected, and we got the same IP again. So now let's take a look and see if we can enter the IP address that we had trouble connecting to previously. Okay, you'll see that this is on the .0 network while we are connected to the 1.2 network. Okay, and it asks for our credentials. We just provide a username and password that has credentials to access the Samba share. And there we have it. We're able to connect and transfer files. It's probably going to be a little bit slow, not the quickest connection speed here at the client's on the client's machine, but it gets the job done for what they need. Now, we also have access to other addresses. So this is another share, their backup directory and their data directory, and the other web services that they have on their network, such as Webmin on one of the servers that they have there at the office. Okay, so now that this is established, let's take a look at what we need to do if we don't want to provide VPN access to our entire network, and we just want to limit it to the TrueNAS system itself. So we can keep pretty much all of the same options. The only option we need to change here is gateway enable. Okay, so we can edit this option, select disabled, select save, and restart this system. So basically this will stop IPv4 forwarding, so the TrueNAS system won't forward network requests out of the TrueNAS system. Okay, so let's restart. And we'll head over to our remote system and take a look at the connection there. So we're back over on the remote system after the TrueNAS reboot. Let's connect back with our VPN connection, and we'll take a look at what we have access to now. So let's take a look if we have access to the TrueNAS server, and we do. Okay, let's take a look if we have access to the other server that we were connecting to. Okay, and it doesn't look like it. Let's try with ping. Okay, and we get no response. So it's pretty easy to switch between full subnet access and just the TrueNAS server access. If you want to limit it just to the TrueNAS, you can do that. If you want the whole subnet and you want to be able to allow the client to connect to the entire subnet, you just re-enable that and restart your TrueNAS system, and you should be good to go. I hope this has given you some confidence in getting a VPN set up connected to your server so that you can access your server from remote locations. This is something that's pretty difficult going in alone, but with the tutorials and help that you get on the internet and YouTube, this can be done within 20 minutes or so. It took me a while to figure all this out with lots of help from forums from like DigitalOcean and Reddit and a couple of YouTube videos. We can get this accomplished. I got a lot of the information for this setup from other YouTube creators like SpaceRex, from forums like Reddit and DigitalOcean's help forums. I hope this video gives you some confidence in getting connected remotely over a VPN client with your TrueNAS system. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.